So let's get started early today, shall we? All right. So I've been going down this rabbit hole lately, and it started in the most embarrassing way possible, which is that I was watching Reddit YouTube story shorts. You know, the ones where somebody's reading over a post and in the background is either Minecraft parkour footage or a subway surfer running endlessly while a robotic voice tells you about somebody's nightmare mother-in-law. And I've been watching these. Like, generally. Oh, shit, no. Mother-in-law. I've been generally watching these. Oh, no, not again. Okay. A little hiccup again. I'm so sorry. Okay. Well, good thing it is now 8 o'clock. So. Okay. So I've been going down this rabbit hole lately, and it started in the most embarrassing way possible, which is that I was watching Reddit story shorts. Oh wait, I already told you guys that. Anyway, and I'm watching these, genuinely watching them, multiple in a row, of course, and at some point, my brain just flatlined. Not because they were boring exactly, but because I couldn't tell where one ended and the next one began. Same pacing, same dramatic pause before the plot twist, same comment at the end, like, and that's when I knew. And I remember sitting there thinking, wait, have these always been identical, or did I just stop being able to tell the difference? And that question kind of broke my brain a little, because it opened up into something bigger. It wasn't just the Reddit stories. It was everything. The way certain thumbnails have converged on the same expression. Mouths open, eyes wide, pointing at something off screen. The way a certain kind of storytime video has a specific rhythm that you can feel before the person even starts talking. The way you scroll through hundreds of pieces of content and feel like you've seen it all before. Even the stuff you're technically seeing for the first time. There's a phrase for this, kind of. Semantic saptation. It's when you repeat a word so many times it stops meaning anything. Your brain just basically stops processing it as language. And I think something similar is happening with content now. We've consumed so much of it structured the same way, delivered the same way, that we've developed this weird immunity to it. It doesn't land anymore. It just passes through one ear and out the other. And here's the thing. What I actually want to talk about today. People are blaming AI for this. And I get it. I do. I really do. Because AI makes it visible. Like, suddenly there's this very obvious mechanical version of the problem sitting right in front of everyone, and people can point at it and say, that is what's wrong. But the sameness didn't start with AI. AI just handed us a mirror. And the reflection was uncomfortable because we realized, oh, we're already doing this. We're already producing content that sounded like it was generated by something trying to approximate human creativity rather than expressing it. And I know this, and I'm just going to say it because I did it. I had this series on my channel. It's deleted now. It was AI written, AI voiced, and I genuinely thought I was being the clever little product of efficiency I could be. This was before I was a published author, so I'm not going to pretend that I had all this craft knowledge I was ignoring. I didn't. I really didn't. I was just making random stuff and hoping it would stick. Basically, it was my spaghetti to the wall. Of course it didn't stick. Because looking back at it now, everything I know about voice, structure, what makes a story feel something, it was the exact problem I'm describing. It was content shaped. It had all the pieces in the right places. It just didn't mean anything. There was nobody home. And that's the thing that keeps nagging at me. Not that the content existed, but that for a while I couldn't tell. Which means the sameness isn't always something you can immediately see. Sometimes you have to develop the sensitivity to feel it. And that sensitivity takes time. And most people scrolling through their feeds right now have not had any reason to develop it. They're just scrolling. And the algorithm is not exactly incentivizing them to slow down and go, wait, does this actually have a distinct perspective, or does it just sound like it does? So if you're just jumping in, we're basically talking about the thing nobody's quite naming correctly, which is the sameness problem in content older and deeper than AI. And it matters to story creators specifically because we're not immune to it. Writers, filmmakers, game designers, we catch this disease too. And I want to get into what it actually looks like when it infects a story. And more importantly, what the resistance looks like. Because there is resistance. There are writers who are doing something genuinely different. And it's not because they're trying to be weird. It's because specific decisions they make about voice, structure, and what they're willing to commit to. So let's stay in the problem for a second longer, because I don't think we've fully looked at it yet. Here's what sameness actually is in story terms. It's not repetition. Repetition can be great. Genre fiction lives on repetition, and that's not a knock. People want certain things from a cozy mystery or a romance novel, and delivering those things is not the same as being creatively bankrupt. Sameness is something different. Sameness is when the voice disappears. When you strip out the specific consciousness of a particular person making a particular choice, and what's left is just the skeleton of what a story is supposed to look like. Yeah, the structure is there, the emotional beats are there, the moments are technically happening, but no one's driving. It's on autopilot. And you can feel it, you really can. It's that thing when you're reading something or watching something and you're following it fine and nothing's wrong, but you're also sort of not there. You're not leaning in. Your brain is processing but not actually investing. And you might finish it and have nothing to say about it afterwards. It didn't upset you. It didn't move you. It doesn't change how you see something. It just occupied 40 minutes of your life and dissolved. I think about this with no sleep stories on Reddit, actually, because that community is fascinating. There's genuinely brilliant stuff in there. Stuff that hits you in the chest and stays with you for days. But there's also a massive volume of content that follows this extremely specific template that so closely it reads like a genre exercise. You've got the unreliable narrator who doesn't realize something's wrong at first. The slow escalation of weirdness. The moment where they make the connection. The ending that applies it's still happening. And those elements aren't bad. That structure works. And it works for a reason. But when the structure is the whole thing, when there's nothing underneath that's specific or true and coming from a particular person's fear, obsession, or sense of humor, it just becomes another story. And there are plenty of those. Compare that to something like Thomas Ligotti. If you don't know Ligotti, he writes horror fiction, and he has this style that is honestly genuinely difficult. It's dense. It's philosophical. He's clearly working out some very specific and dark ideas about consciousness and pessimism and the nature of existence, all the heavy stuff. And he doesn't make it easier for you. But you're never, not for 1 second, you never feel like you're reading something a machine produced. You feel the weight of a specific mind, and that specificity is what makes it horror. Not the monsters, not the plot, just the sense that someone real is showing you something they actually believe is true. And that is terrifying. That's the gap. The distance between content that has a voice and content that is performing to have a voice. And here's where I really want to dig in, because this part actually matters for people who are creating stories. The performance of voice is the trap, because it's not the sameness content that is trying to be bad. Most of the time it's trying very hard. It's following advice. It's hitting the beats it's told to hit. It's showing, not telling. It's raising the stakes and giving the protagonist a fatal flaw. All the right moves that should make great stories, but craft without consciousness is just technique. And technique without a specific point of view is just a machine running a program. I think about this with Sally Rooney, and I did mention her last stream because it's very important. Anyway. And I know, she's a polarizing name. People either love normal people or they find it unbearable, and honestly, both reactions are valid. But here's the thing that I think gets overlooked in those arguments. Her prose is doing something technically strange that most people don't consciously notice. She doesn't use quotation marks for dialogue. She writes in this close third person that bleeds into first without announcing it. Her characters are passive to the point of frustration, and the narrative doesn't apologize for it. Those are choices. Specific, committed, risky choices that reflect a particular way of seeing relationships and interiority and the spaces between what people say and what they mean. You can hate it for all you want, but you can't mistake it for anyone else's work. You can't confuse a Rooney novel with a Kinsella novel. They're not even in the same universe, despite being shelved next to each other. Now, think about how much contemporary literary fiction, the kind that keeps getting called promising and assured, sounds kind of like Rooney, or like Jenny Offill, or like whoever won the Booker last year. Not plagiarism, nothing like that, just a convergence, a gravitational pull toward whatever voice is currently being praised at the time. Because writers are readers, and readers are influenced, and influence is not inherently bad except when it comes to substitution. When someone else's voice becomes the template you pour into your story, instead of the thing that shows you what's possible. And This, by the way, is where AI circles back in a way that I think is actually interesting. Because what language models do, like mechanically at the level of how they work, is they find patterns in enormous amounts of text. They produce output that's statistically likely given what came before. They do what a writer does when they're too influenced by one source and haven't found their voice yet. They produce the most probable next sentence. And by definition, that's the most familiar one. The one that sounds right because you heard something like it before. And that's comfort, right? It feels good to read something familiar, but comfort and resonance are not the same thing. When everything is comfortable, nothing resonates. So, when people started noticing that AI-generated content felt off, I think what they were actually detecting, even if they couldn't say it at the time, was the absence of choices. Because a writer, a real writer, who has internalized something and is actively trying to express it, will make choices that are statistically weird. They'll use a word that's technically wrong but emotionally right. They'll break a sentence in a place that creates a rhythm you don't expect. They'll follow a thought further than seems necessary because that's where they actually live. Not because that's where the template says to stop. Cormac McCarthy doesn't use quotation marks either. And he and Rooney have nothing else in common, but the lack of quotation marks in their work means completely different things because it comes from completely different places. For McCarthy, it's about this almost geological sense of time, like the dialogue is just weather, but there's no reason to make it special. For Rooney, it's about the blurring of speech, and the way we say and what we think become indistinguishable in relationships. Same technique, opposite philosophy. That's what a specific consciousness looks like in craft. You can't get that from write me a chapter in the style of Cormac McCarthy. Sure, you'll get the no quotation marks. You'll get the sparse dialogue and the imagery and the descriptions, but you won't get the philosophy. Because that isn't a stylistic choice. It's the thing the style grew out of. Okay, different angle. Because I want to talk about this in terms of games for a second. Because game writers deal with a version of this problem that I think is underrepresented in conversations on that side of the craft. Disco Elysium. If you know, you know. If you don't, it's a role-playing game that was released in 2019, made by a small studio in Estonia, and it is probably the most distinctive narrative voice of any game I've ever seen. The main character is a detective who woke up with complete amnesia in a trashed hotel room, and the game is essentially him trying to piece himself back together while simultaneously trying to solve a murder. And there are these internal monologues that, like, different parts of his psyche are actually speaking to him as characters. His inland empire is a character. His electrochemistry, which is diction, is a character. And they argue with each other, and they argue with him, and they have opinions on everything. Now, on paper, that sounds like a gimmick. But it's not. It's because the writers are not using the system to be clever. They're using it to say something specific about consciousness and self-destruction and what it means to rebuild an identity you can't remember having. Every choice, every system, every mechanic in that game is in service of a specific thesis about a specific kind of person. And the result is something you cannot compare to any other game, because nothing else comes from that exact place. That's the resistance. That's what's holding out against sameness. Or sorry, that's what holding out against sameness actually looks like. Not being weird for weirdness' sake. Being specific to the point of specificity where it becomes the thing itself. And the frustrating thing, the thing that I think makes this hard to teach and talk about, is that you can't get there by following a process. Disco Elysium didn't happen because somebody followed a world-building checklist. Normal People didn't happen because the author filled out a character sheet. House of Leaves by Danilowski is genuinely one of the strangest things I've ever held in my hands. It has multiple competing narratives running in footnotes, and the text is actually rotates on some pages. Kind of weird. But House of Leaves didn't happen because somebody said, I want to write a unique book. What format should I use? It happened because the author had this very specific obsession with how to construct and inhabit domestic space. And the physical strangeness of the book is the only container that could hold that obsession. The specificity comes first. The technique comes second in service of it. And when you flip that, when you grab the technique because it seems interesting and try to find content to fill it with, you get something that looks like it has a voice, but doesn't. And I'll be honest with you. I caught myself doing this. Not recently, but when I was building out content of, this channel many, many moons ago, before I really understood what I was doing craft-wise, I would sometimes look at something that was working for someone else and say, I should try that structure. And sometimes it worked in my favor, and it was just learning after all. But there's a version of it that's less learning and more borrowing the container and hoping my stuff would fill it the same way. And it never did, because the container wasn't built for my stuff. It was built for theirs. The deleted series I mentioned, that's exactly what happened there. I wasn't expressing anything specific. I wasn't producing output that had the shape of expression. And after a while, that felt like the same thing, but it wasn't. And hold on. Sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, and eventually I knew it wasn't, and that's why it got deleted. I'm not telling that story to be self-flagellating about it. Genuinely, it was a learning experience, and I have no complicated feelings about it now. I'm telling it because I think it's actually useful to hear from someone who was inside that particular mistake, rather than just someone who observed it from the outside. Because from inside it feels completely normal. It feels like making content. You're putting things together, pushing them out. People are engaging or they're not, but the machine is running. And you can stay in that for a long time without ever stopping to ask, what's the real view underneath any of it? That's the uncomfortable thing about sameness. It's not always visible from the inside. So, as I've been thinking about this more, there's a difference between writers who are avoiding something and writers who are moving towards something. And the avoiding, even when they're technically doing everything right, produce work that feels like it's in retreat. Like you can sense the energy of trying not to make mistakes rather than trying to say the specific thing. And avoiding mistakes produces competent work. It produces publishable work sometimes, but it doesn't produce the work that stays with you. The writers who are moving towards something, like a specific fear, question, or image they can't get out of their heads, those writers make different kinds of mistakes, but the work has gravity. It pulls you in, even when it's flawed. And with genre fiction, specifically, because genre gets a bad rap in these conversations, and I think that's unfair, the argument often goes, literary fiction has voice, genre fiction follows formulas, and that's not accurate. Because some literary fiction is incredibly formulaic. It's just the formula that gets praised instead of dismissed. And some genre fiction has a voice so strong that it basically transcends the category. Terry Pratchett. Okay. Well. Discworld is a series of, I think, 41 novels at this point. And it's fantasy. And it's got wizards and witches and trolls and all of that. And it follows genre conventions in a lot of ways. But the voice is so completely, specifically Pratchett that reading any novel of his is like having a conversation with someone you recognize immediately. His footnotes alone are a complete literary device that no one else has done in the same way. Not because the footnotes are a novel idea, but because his use of them, for jokes that are too good to bury in the main text, reflects a specific comedic sensibility that is entirely his. When Pratchett died in 2015, there was this enormous outpouring of grief, and a big part of it was there's no one else who does what he did. Not, there's no one else who writes funny fantasy. There's plenty of that. There's no one else who does this. That's the measure. When you're gone, can people point to what you did that no one else was doing? And I don't think every writer needs to be clear of that bar every single time. It's really an impossible standard for a first draft or a YouTube video. But it's worth asking, as a baseline question for your own work, is there something here that could only come from me? Not a better me, not a trained me. From me, right now, as I sit in this chair. With any and all blind spots, obsessions, and experiences that I have. Because here's the thing about obsessions. The weird ones, the specific ones, the ones you're embarrassed to talk about. Those are your material. That's where your voice actually lives. The thing you've read everything about. The thing you think about when you're driving down the road. The thing you can't explain why you care about it, but you just do. That's not a distraction from your creative work. It's the engine. I have this weird ongoing obsession with the way small towns in America deal with their own history. Specifically, the gap between what a town commemorates and what it actually is. Like, there's this whole version of local history that puts plaques and murals and tourism brochures. But then there's the histories that are in the attics, so to speak. The ones where everyone kind of knows but nobody officially acknowledges. And I find that gap fascinating from a story perspective because it's a structural thing. There's a surface narrative and a suppressed narrative, and eventually, they're going to interact. And that interaction is always a story. That's mine. That's a specific interest I have that affects the kind of stories I'm drawn to, the kind of details I notice, the kind of questions I think that are worth asking. And that specificity is what would make content I make about it different from content people make about a similar topic. Not because I'm more talented, but because I'm bringing a particular angle that comes from a real place. And I think this is the actual answer to the sameness problem. As a creator, not be more original. That's useless. It doesn't mean anything practical anyway. The actual answer is stop suppressing your specific thing. Stop rounding yourself off. The parts of you that feel too niche or too weird or too personal are the parts that will save you and your work from being forgettable. Because the forgettable stuff is always averaged anyway. The stuff that's been smoothed and softened and palatable until the person who made it isn't really in it anymore. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated. And I want to sit with this because I don't think I've fully figured it out yet either. But there's a tension between specificity and accessibility. And it's real. If you go too specific, too insular, too in your head, you can lose the thread with your audience. The thing that makes your work yours can also make it incomprehensible to anyone who isn't you. And that's its own failure mode. The writers who actually thread that needle, the ones whose work is deeply specific but broadly felt, I think they're doing something particular. They're being specific about feelings, about not just details. Like, the details are hyperlocal, but the emotional truth underneath is something universal enough that a stranger can find their way in. Discworld is full of specific jokes that require you to know things about British culture or history. Excuse me. Or bureaucracy. And those jokes are funny if you get them and invisible if you don't. But the emotional core, the thing about dignity, acts of heroism, and people fail each other and try anyway, that's everywhere. You don't need to get the specific joke to feel the thing underneath. There's also architecture, specific surface, universal foundation. And getting that right is genuinely hard, and I don't think there's a formula for it, but it helps to know what you're aiming for. And none of this is solved by AI, by the way. I want to be really clear about that because this is something we're going to be talking about for the next few months on this channel. AI can help you with a lot of things. It can help you brainstorm, break down blocks. It can help with logistics, which we will all talk about in the upcoming months. And this is why I think the period we're in right now is interesting rather than depressing. Because the sameness is becoming so visible, as AI made it visible, like I said, that I think it's going to create a counter pressure. People can already feel that something is missing, even if they can't name it. They scroll past the Reddit shorts, past the AI voiceover content, the perfectly structured but weirdly empty blog posts, and they stop at the thing that has a person in it. A real one. With a real specific thing to say. That's going to be more valuable, not less, as the average gets flatter. Which is encouraging or just self-serving for those of us who are trying to make things with actual voices. Probably both. I think about something a writing teacher once said to me. Well, not me specifically, I read it. But the line was something like this. Your job is not to be understood. Your job is to be true, and understanding will follow. gone back and forth on that because it sounds like it could be an excuse for being impenetrable. But I think what it's actually pointing at is the sequence. You can't reverse engineer a real voice by starting with what the audience wants and working backwards. You start with what's true, for you specifically, and then you work to make that accessible. You can edit for clarity, but you can't edit for authenticity. And editing and authenticity is exactly why AI-generated content is trying to do, and why it falls flat. Because you can't start from average and add specificity back. It doesn't work that way. The specificity has to be baked in from the beginning. It has to be the thing you're starting from. So when I look back at my own deleted series now, I don't really cringe at the AI part. I cringe at the part where I had nothing specific to say. The AI was just the tool that helped me produce high volumes of nothing specific efficiently. But that was already there, waiting, because I hadn't done the harder work of figuring out what I actually had to contribute. What my particular weird angle was. What the gap was between the content that existed and the content I could only make. And I know what that is now. Took a while. Still figuring out the edges of it, but I know the center. And that changes everything about how I approach a script or a story or a piece of content. Because I'm not starting from what performs well or what's in the template. I'm starting from what's the thing I actually want to say that I haven't heard said in quite this way from this angle. That's a much harder starting point. It's uncomfortable because you're not working from a proven framework. You're working from your own weird corner of the world. And there's always this voice going, who cares about this? And that's too specific and people won't get it. But the alternative, the everything feels the same alternative, that's its own kind of failure. Just a quieter one you can scroll past without noticing. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe that's the reason the sameness problem is hard to talk about, is that its consequences are so quiet. It's not a catastrophic failure. It's an absence. It's the thing that didn't happen. The reader who didn't feel anything. The viewer who scrolled past. The story that didn't stick. And absences are harder to point at than disasters, but they're real and they accumulate. The writers and creators who are paying attention to this, the ones who are asking, does this have a real point of view? Is there someone home here? Those are the ones who are going to matter 5 years from now. Not because they're better technicians, but because they put in the work to know what they're actually trying to say. And you can feel that difference. Maybe not consciously, maybe not immediately, but you can feel it. Yeah. And it's not a clear answer, because I don't think it has one. I think the question, is someone home in here, is worth asking about everything you make. Every script, every story, every chapter. Not just a judgment. Well, not as a judgment, just as a check-in. Just to make sure the light is on. Anyway. Alright, I'm curious what you guys are all thinking about this, because I know this is one of those topics where people have strong opinions. Some of you probably nodded along the whole time, or probably think I'm being too hard on AI. And some of you are probably going, okay, but how do you actually find the specific thing, though? Which is a fair follow-up, and I'm happy to get into it at a later time. So let me know in the comments below what you guys think. And this is WriteSparky, and I will see you in the next video.